The colony just inside Torney's space was nothing special. Almost a barren rock if you didn't count the fact that it was fertile land enough to be farmed. Food was always a desirable resource, and the Torney actually didn't mind it too much. They enjoyed the solitude as they did not want to get in any of the major battles that it seemed like everybody was getting into nowadays. The colony itself was not anywhere near the fighting. In fact, it was so far out of the way that unless they called for some sort of shipping to sell their goods, no one ever showed up. It was so far out of the way that several other species ended up showing up there, just trying to get away from it all. You had several different insectoid species, mammalian, reptilian. It was all there, except for aquatic, as there was no large bodies of water for them to reside. That being said, one could mistake it many times for an old-fashioned human frontier town, as everyone simply moved along with their lives, not really caring about what was going on. The only difference is, of course, instead of horse-drawn wagons, you had powered wagons, uh, anti-grav systems to move things. It was still a lot of hard labor and a lot of hard work. Most people there decided to either raise crops or raise some sort of livestock that they could sell for parts. Yet still, it was a quiet colony world, as it was dotted with several small towns, and most everybody worked out of those small towns. And everyone liked the fact that they were away from the massive governments that always caused problems. There was almost no taxes, as everyone grew their own food anyway. There was a little bit of magistrate of things of that nature, but most everyone was simple and they just decided to pull together as any species would for any type of survival. Though this sometimes mixed several species, and there were, of course, disputes, and of course, there was always those that decided to try and go indulge themselves with a couple milliliters of what the humans call alcohol. This, in many cases, would end up with a fight, and someone end up in the drunk tank waiting to be sobered up. The medics may or may not show up for a few hours, letting them stew in their own misgivings. However, that was mostly up to the sheriff themselves. But many towns didn't even have this and simply settled things. And this, again, suited everyone just fine, especially those that wanted more than their share. A simple farmer, Tock, was farming with his two boys. His wife long passed from a disease, and they moved to this place to try and get away from the populated areas that had caused her to get sick. He lamented the fact that his species would not allow other species to bring in their medical technology. When they landed, he befriended a human that he known as Raj, and Raj was able to actually fix the same disease in Tock's son. His youngest was amazed by this, and they would every once in a while drive to the next town to visit their friend Raj. This was a simple thing, but they didn't get to see him as much as they wanted to, seeing that Raj was all the way across, that they would have to take 2 or 3 hours worth of drive to actually reach him. They only got to see him maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, but he was always inviting to them, always bringing them in for some sort of snack, some sort of drink. Tock simply enjoyed the fact that he could take a break from the mundane life and listen to some of the weird stories that Raj used to tell. Tock didn't really care for this, as he just wanted to hear something other than the hum of machinery and, of course, the bleating of many of his livestock. He did have to tell Raj that they were having trouble with one of the newcomers. One of the newcomers, a tourney like him, was being a bit aggressive, claiming that everywhere that he looked belonged to him. He would muscle in, and in many cases, when people tried to defend themselves, this Tanri would simply end one of his own species. Sometimes that strange mechanical precision that he used to move his upper manipulator would move so quick that others couldn't figure out how in the heck he got it out of the holster so fast and took someone down. Sometimes he made this a public display after seeing one of these, what the humans called westerns, that many of those in the area just loved to watch. He believed this would be the best way to get a hold of the land itself, through intimidation, scare tactics, and of course a little murder. Tiktok was concerned that his farm might be next on the chopping block, and his human companion Raj said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it if it comes to that. So you just don't worry the spiky head of yours." Tiktok looked over at his sons, who were sitting there listening close to the conversation. They were worried, but not too worried. It wasn't until about 3 months after the newcomer showed up that Tiktok was bringing his boys back from a visit from Raj. Raj was going to be about an hour behind them as he had business in the town. When they came up, they saw there was a strange pile of smoke coming up in a certain direction. What the heck was going on? We were just out to get some extra feed and to visit a friend. What's going on? Tiktok thought as he moved his way towards his farm, and it didn't take long to realize that it was his place that was on fire. By the time he reached there, the whole place had burned to the ground. Not only the house, but the shed as well. Oddly enough, the barns, where all the livestock were untouched. It was though someone was trying to tell him to leave, but leave all the usable materials, all the sellable goods, i.e., the livestock, the grains, and everything else he had. Tiktok was so far beyond furious as he had spent his last credit making his life there and was just starting to get ahead. He wanted to have something for his boys, and he was so angry that he just allowed the anger to take hold of him. He drove into town, stopping just outside, telling his boys to wait, as he grabbed his own sidearm and started running around screaming for the one who was trying to muscle in. The one who was there was simply puffing on something that he had got from a human a long time ago. It was called a cigar. This was something that would make him extremely, extremely high, yet he wouldn't lose much of his dexterity, and he knew it. As he was called out and called a coward for burning down the farm while he was gone, Tiktok demanded compensation, which of course the other one refused to give. And then Tiktok demanded he come face him like a man. They both began to walk towards each other, and just as Tiktok went to raise his weapon, he fell. He felt something go through his chest and stumbled backwards, and the last thing he saw was the look on his boys' faces as they just turned the corner after they heard the shot. All he thought was, "No, don't let them see this." The body landed on the ground, and his boys came out, and the one who had shot him was laughing, taunting everyone else to try something, try and take him down as well. If they thought they had any type of wits about them, they would just pack up and leave or work for him, and he would pay them whatever he thought they deserved. Even as he was standing barely 10 feet from the body of the man he had just blown one of his hearts out, he simply spat towards the man and laughed at the boys as they grieved over their father. Then he heard something. "I'll be your huckleberry, bitch." He turned and looked, and there was a strange black coat waving in the wind as this odd bipedal beast that he had only read about, he had never actually seen one in person, began walking towards him. Tiktok's sons were still grieving as this human walked up next to him. They looked up, and Raj looked strange to them. He kneeled down, and with one hand waved his hands over the eye stalk, closing the eyes for the last times. He then looked at the boys and said, "Take your daddy out of here." With that, they both picked up the body and drug it off to the side. The human stood up, was standing slightly canted away from the one who had just taken his friend's life. "You did this?" "Yeah." "You think you can do better than him?" "You're welcome to try." The human simply began to raise his head, exposing eyes with a piercing glaze towards the one who had just taken out his friend. He didn't bother to ask the fat guy's name, but as that fat Tonri reached for his weapon, bang! He didn't even get it out of his holster. One of the eye stalks drooped, slowly followed by the other one. The bullet that had came out had gone right between his eyes, or at least the Tonri equivalent of between his eyes. With that, everyone looked as the human was still holding the slightly smoking ends of his pistol. He held it straight there, cocked the hammer back one more time, as the fat Tonri had not quite fallen yet, just stopped moving. With that, the fat Tonri seemed to flinch ever so slightly. Bang! Another shot went out. This one went straight through the chest. Cocking the hammer back one more time, he waited. Yet the fat one didn't move. At least not for a few seconds. Eventually, the body, which had been stunned by the impact, which is why it didn't move, simply dropped where it was, falling down on its 4 knees and slumping down forward as though it had just given up. The human cocked the hammer back, walked up, and looked down at the fat Tonri as it just laid slumped there. Others looked over. Some were whispering, some were slightly cheering, others were worried what was going to happen. The human simply leaned back with its leg and then kicked the fat Tonri in the face. As the eyes and head rolled back, he realized that it was dead. Without skipping another beat, he spit on him and then simply walked away. From then on, they realized there was a reason why this human had hidden themselves way out in the middle of nowhere. In Tonri space, the Tonri didn't even share a border with human society. This human must have tried to get away. But how could he be such a cold-blooded killer? Clearly, there was something off about him. Many of those who were there started to ask about this human that they called Raj. Looking at the way he was dressed, they realized that humans called them cowboys. Since he was always one to bring up faith and how to live a good life on his end of town, many people over there called him preacher. To the boys that had just lost their father, and of course, Tiki Talk that was no longer sucking air, they called him friend. But to everyone else who looked at him, he only had one name. This human would be called Death.